The world had never witnessed such a meeting, not in all the bloodied chapters of its history. Beneath a bruised, smoke-choked sky, the last surviving leaders of humanity gathered amidst the ruined skeleton of New York City. The United Nations building, once a symbol of cooperation and hope, stood shattered, its glass windows blown out, its marble floors cracked and littered with ash. Military hover drones circled overhead, their engines humming like restless ghosts, scanning the perimeter for any sign of alien scouts. Inside the broken hall, the atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating, as men and women who had once called each other rivals, enemies, even traitors, sat shoulder to shoulder. Every face wore the same hollow expression, a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and the brittle anger of a species pushed to the brink. The President of the former United States rose first, his uniform dirty, his face unshaven, but his voice strong. No ceremony was needed, no lengthy speeches, no promises of a brighter tomorrow. Standing in front of a scorched and crumbling world map, he simply said, "If we do not act together, we will fall apart alone." The statement hung in the thick, ash-filled air, more powerful than any declaration of war. The Chinese premier, flanked by two battered generals, nodded grimly. "This is no longer about borders or flags," he said, his voice hoarse. "It is about survival. We either fight as one species, or we die divided, like insects crushed underfoot." His words sent a murmur through the crowd, a rustling of once proud leaders forced to confront the truth that had always been waiting beneath their politics and pride. Representatives from every surviving nation, some dressed in fine military attire, others wrapped in blood-streaked bandages, stepped forward one by one. The British Prime Minister offered intelligence reports. The President of Brazil pledged troops. The leader of what was left of Australia promised the last of their air fleets. Even the smallest nations, with nothing but a few thousand survivors, hiding in ruined cities, swore whatever strength they could muster. Titles meant nothing now. Power was meaningless without unity. Maps were unrolled on battered tables. Hollow screens flickered, some damaged and crackling with static, projecting enemy ship formations and patterns of devastation across the continents. Strategies clashed, voices rose, tempers flared. But the realization burned in every heart. This was not the time for pride. This was not the time for old wounds. Earth was bleeding, and if the leaders in this room could not find a way to seal the wound, it would bleed to death. As arguments simmered into rough, reluctant agreements, the world outside the cracked walls seemed to hold its breath. Dust storms swirled down empty avenues where once millions had walked. The bones of skyscrapers pointed accusing fingers at the gray sky. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a lonely cry in a dying city. In the final hour before dawn, the surviving nations signed a pact. No ceremony marked the moment, no gold pens, no photographs, no celebrations. Only the grim nods of men and women who understood the weight of their choice. A pact not written for glory or conquest, but for the simple, stubborn survival of their kind. Humanity would fight back, not as tribes, not as kingdoms, not as republics, but as one. A single battered drone broadcast the decision across every remaining communication network on the planet. Survivors huddled around flickering screens in broken homes, refugee camps, and underground bunkers. Soldiers, farmers, doctors, teachers, All of them watched as the announcement crackled to life. The nations of Earth would rise together. Hope, fragile and battered, flared in human hearts. It was not over. Not yet. As the first light of dawn broke through the smoke and ashes, the leaders of Earth emerged from the ruined United Nations Hall. They stood together on the broken steps, a ragged line of defiance against the cold, uncaring stars above. The sun, though faint behind the clouds, caught the edges of their silhouettes, casting long shadows over the shattered streets. In that moment, they did not look like politicians or generals. They looked like warriors. They looked like humanity's last stand. Somewhere beyond the sky, the alien forces watched, and for the first time, perhaps, they began to wonder if humanity would be as easy to crush as they had believed. The night before the first strike, humanity's resolve was steel. With every passing hour, the warships gathered in Earth's orbit, each one a patchwork of hastily welded metal, the last remnants of countries that had once been divided by borders and pride. The decision had been made. There would be no more hesitation, no more waiting for the alien forces to show mercy, which they never would. This was the beginning of humanity's defiance, a desperate but necessary attempt to show the invaders that Earth would not be cowed. At the command center aboard the largest of the makeshift warships, Freedom's Spear, Commander Vega stood before a massive tactical display. Her face, lined with exhaustion, mirrored the seriousness of her thoughts. The screens flickered, showing the alien fleet, an unyielding wall of sleek, black ships that stretched across the heavens. They were waiting, watching. Humanity had done nothing but retreat in the face of their destruction. But today, that would change. The hum of the ship's engines pulsed beneath the feet of the soldiers who silently prepared for what lay ahead. Vega's voice cracked over the intercom as she addressed the fleet. "We may not have the numbers, but we have something they don't. Our will to survive. Stay sharp. We strike first. We hit hard." A slight tremble in her voice betrayed the fear she fought to suppress. It wasn't just the size of the alien fleet that made her nervous. It was the uncertainty of what would happen after the strike. The weight of command had never felt so crushing. Her fingers hovered over the console, the countdown flashing on, the screen. A red light blinked, signifying that the order to fire was imminent. The human fleet, composed of ships from every corner of the world, prepared for a coordinated assault. Missiles, railguns, and nuclear warheads were locked and loaded, aimed at the enemy ships that had brought Earth to its knees. Every nation's finest military personnel had been brought together, now standing side by side on the decks of these battered warships, united in their singular purpose. With a deep breath, Vega gave the signal. Fire! For a brief, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. And then, the void between the ships exploded with the raw fury of human resolve. A series of missiles shot from the human ships, each one streaking through the blackness of space with blinding speed. The silence of space was broken only by the distant sounds of the engines and the occasional powerful roar of a rocket propelling the warheads. They flew through space like angry comets, heading straight for the heart of the alien fleet. The first hit landed with a flash of blue light. One of the alien ships, a massive vessel with glowing tendrils like some monstrous sea creature, cracked, open, spilling debris in every direction. The humans aboard the ships cheered, a primal, savage release of tension. For a moment, it felt like victory was within grasp. the tide of the war beginning to turn. The alien ships, caught off guard by the sudden assault, scrambled in disarray, their sleek forms jerking as their evasive maneuvers sent them darting in every direction. But that fleeting sense of victory vanished almost as quickly as it had come. A new wave of retaliation erupted from the alien fleet, a brutal counterattack that left no room for mercy. Beams of white, scorching energy ripped through the vacuum of space, targeting the human ships with deadly precision. Within seconds, the remains of one of the largest human warships, Valor's Flame, exploded into a cloud of burning debris. It was as if the aliens had been waiting for this moment, their silence now broken by a devastating show of force. One by one, the human ships were picked off, their once proud structures ripped apart by the unseen power of alien technology. Vega's heart sank as the remaining ships scrambled to evade the deadly beams. Her own ship, Freedom's Spear, took a violent jolt as an alien pulse grazed its shield. The lights flickered, the sound of alarms filling the ears of everyone aboard. Another blast hit, and the shields began to fail. The hull groaned under the strain. "Prepare for impact." Vega's voice was steady despite the chaos. It was clear now. This was no fight between two armies. It was a fight between worlds. Earth's forces were no match for the aliens' raw power. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, Commander Vega couldn't bring herself to retreat. She had promised her people a fight, and as long as there was a breath in her body, she would give them one. "Hold the line," she ordered through gritted teeth. The crew, battered but not broken, clung to the hope that something, anything, might turn the tide. But in the cold vastness of space, that hope felt smaller than ever. Humanity had struck. The aliens had answered, and now the real fight had begun. The silence of space, cold and indifferent, was shattered by the roar of the alien fleet as it retaliated. The moment their weapons engaged, the calm that had defined the vastness of the universe vanished into a storm of fire and destruction. Humanity's missiles, fired in desperation and hope, had failed to make a lasting dent in the seemingly invincible wall of alien ships. Their sleek, dark forms moved with unnerving precision, their technology far more advanced than anything humanity could have dreamed. For a brief, fleeting moment, there had been optimism, a glimmer of victory when the first alien ship exploded into a shower of debris. But that victory was short-lived, smothered beneath the overwhelming might of the alien retaliation. Vega stood on the bridge of Freedom's Spear, her hands gripping the control panel with such force that her knuckles whitened. The air was thick with tension, the walls of the command room echoing with the frantic footsteps of crew members running from station to station. Outside, the alien ships moved in coordinated formations, their movements almost fluid as they sliced through space with terrifying speed. From the monitors, the image of the human fleet was already dwindling, like ants being squashed underfoot by an uncaring hand. The first blow came without warning, a beam of energy so powerful it could have melted a planet. It struck Valor's Flame, one of the largest ships in the fleet, dead center. The ship shuddered violently before exploding in a blinding flash. The shockwave rocked the remaining human ships, and Vega's eyes were drawn to the wreckage floating in the vast emptiness. In the blink of an eye, one of humanity's last hopes was reduced to nothing more than burning debris drifting in the vacuum. Vega could feel the pit in her stomach growing deeper. She had known this day would come, but the brutal finality of... It was something entirely different. This wasn't just an invasion, it was an execution. The alien forces had been waiting for humanity's defiance, for the moment they would dare strike back, and now that moment had arrived in full force. "Command, we're losing shields," the ship's tech officer shouted, his voice strained. "Energy levels are at critical. Divert all remaining power to forward shields," Vega barked, though she knew it would only delay the inevitable. The alien weapons didn't require shields to be broken. They tore through them as if they were paper. Outside, the battlefield turned into a chaotic dance of destruction. Humanity's warships fired desperately, launching every missile, every railgun, every available weapon in their arsenal. But the alien retaliation was swift and merciless. Their weapons, beams of white-hot energy that seemed to bend light around them, struck with unfathomable force. One ship after another succumbed to the onslaught. A cry broke through the silence of the bridge. Another warship had fallen. The crew braced for the shockwave that followed. The ship Aegis was gone, torn to shreds by a burst of concentrated energy. The survivors, if there were any, had been vaporized in an instant. Vega's heart sank, and her mind raced. There was no longer any question about whether humanity could win this fight. The question now was whether any of them would survive. "Retreat," came a voice from the comms officer, who was speaking to the fleet at large. "We can't take this. Our ships are too damaged." Vega clenched her jaw. No retreat. Not yet. It wasn't possible. She had to hold on, even if it meant watching her fleet be torn apart. The crew of Freedom's Spear had given everything they had. They were ready to give their lives, just as the soldiers and civilians below would give theirs. And then, as if in a final cruel twist, a new threat emerged from the alien fleet. Smaller, faster ships, cruisers perhaps, darted from the larger, ships like Predators circling the wounded. Their weapons weren't designed for mass destruction, but for precision strikes. The cruisers aimed directly for the human warship's engines, and one by one, the human ships began to falter. Freedom's Spear lurched violently as a blast struck the portside engine, sending a shudder through the vessel. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the lights flickered briefly before returning to a dull glow. Vega's teeth ground together as the ship groaned. A piercing alarm screamed across the bridge, but it barely registered. Her thoughts were only on one thing: survival. She turned to the helmsman. "Get us out of here. Full reverse." But the alien cruisers were already closing in, relentless, their small size making them more difficult to target. Each ship that escaped the main fleet's fire now had its own dedicated predator. They were encircled. Through the smoke-filled command room, Vega could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The alien fleet's retaliation was swift and unyielding, and the realization settled over her like a cold shroud. Humanity was outclassed, outmatched, and outnumbered. The aliens' weapons were far beyond anything Earth had ever seen, and yet here they were, fighting with everything they had left against an unstoppable force. Space, vast and impassive, seemed to mock them as the remaining ships tried desperately to regroup. In the face of such overwhelming power, humanity's first strike had become little more than a desperate flail against an enemy too great to defeat. And as the final alien ships closed in, it became clear that their retaliation had only just begun. The silence that followed the destruction of humanity's fleet felt more oppressive than the explosions that had rocked space. In the void of space, amidst the shattered remains of their once proud warships, the few remaining human survivors floated in disbelief. The alien retaliation had left no room for doubt. Earth had lost its first battle. But it hadn't lost everything. Commander Vega, standing at the command console aboard Freedom's Spear, felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. The communication channels were flooded with frantic calls for retreat, the voices of officers and soldiers who had seen too much death too quickly. It was understandable. Hope was running thin, and the cost of the fight had been higher than anyone had anticipated. Yet in that quiet moment of despair, something unexpected happened. A voice crackled through the intercom, calm and steady. "We can't stop now. We have to keep going." It was Admiral Lee, the leader of the Pacific Fleet, one of the few survivors, who had managed to escape the wrath of the alien forces. His voice, a beacon of resolve, cut through the tension. "The aliens think we'll fold, that we'll run and hide. But we can't afford to do that. We have to unite, or they'll destroy us all." The words echoed in Vega's mind. The realization hit her like a sudden storm. For months, the nations of Earth had operated independently, each working in their isolated silos, as if the enemy couldn't see the fractured unity. The alien attack had been the catalyst that forced Earth to confront its divisions. But now it became clear, without unity, humanity had no chance. The war would be lost if the people of Earth remained divided. The command center was silent, every crew member absorbing the message in stunned awe. It wasn't just about the military now. It was about every human, from every corner of the Earth, putting aside their differences. The survival of the species depended on it. As Vega looked out into the vastness of space, her thoughts flashed to the leaders of the world. She had spoken to them all in the last few desperate hours before the war began. There had been no real agreement then, only empty promises and fleeting hopes that someone else would take the lead. The human race had clung to old traditions, old ways of thinking, and it had almost cost them everything. Now, the decision had to be made. The nations had to be brought together, not just as separate entities, but as one force, unified under a single banner, or they would face total annihilation. "Open the channels," Vega ordered, her voice unwavering. She knew what had to happen next. This was the turning point. If humanity could not unite now, it would fall. Her hands moved quickly over the console, activating the global communication lines. Within moments, messages were sent to every surviving leader, every military officer who could still fight, calling for an emergency summit, a meeting that would change the course of the war. The screens in the command center flickered to life, displaying leaders from across the world, their faces grim with the weight of the situation. There were no arguments, no division. The sheer force of the situation had removed any hesitation. "We need to form a single unified command," Vega said, her eyes scanning the faces of the leaders, hoping for a response that would match the urgency of her words. "Our fleets, our resources, they have to be shared. Every nation, every survivor has to be part of this." It was as if the room breathed as one. After a long moment, the first voice spoke. The President of the United States, his face tense but resolute. "Commander, you're right. No more division. We fight as one." Soon, every leader, from the leaders of Europe to Africa, to the nations of Asia agreed. They would set aside the years of rivalry, the borders that had once defined them, and face the common enemy as a united force. The world, torn and bleeding from years of discord, now found itself tethered together by a single truth. Survival depended on unity. Vega watched as the human fleet, battered and broken, turned toward a new mission. The remaining ships, despite their damage, began to regroup, slowly forming a new formation, one that represented something more than just a military alliance. It was a symbol of hope, a sign that humanity had learned from its failures. The ground forces, too, began to mobilize. Soldiers, civilians, engineers, scientists. Every person who had the strength to fight gathered under the banner of survival. The newly united global forces began to train, plan, and rebuild what had been lost. There was no room for old grudges. Every nation now understood the stakes. If humanity did not stand together, it would fall apart. Commander Vega stood at the front of the command center, her heart filled with a new kind of resolve. It wasn't just the military leadership that was needed now. It was the entire human race. Every person, no matter their history, their country, or their beliefs, had a role to play. And in that moment, as the planets turned slowly in the sky, a new unity was born. The alien invaders had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to survive, to unite. For the first time since the war began, there was a glimmer of something more than fear. There was hope, a powerful collective hope that, together, humanity could reclaim its future.